Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Rip his throat out. The thought didn't belong to Julian. It crashed into his skull with the violence of a sledgehammer striking glass, sharp and distinct against the dull murmur of the gala's ambient chatter. Julian Vane, a man of absolutely no consequence, froze mid-step, his grip tightening on the stem of his cheap champagne flute until his knuckles turned bone white. He scanned the glittering ballroom, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Across the room, bathed in the golden glow of the chandeliers, stood the source of the mental violence. Dante Kincaid, the billionaire industrialist, the crown prince of the city's elite, the man every magazine declared a saint, a philanthropist, the perfect bachelor. Dante was smiling. It was a dazzling, practiced expression of warmth as he shook hands with an elderly senator. But the voice in Julian's head, Dante's voice, was a snarling, feral thing. Asterisk, let go of my hand, you parasitic leech. I should snap your wrist. I should burn this whole building down with all of you inside. Asterisk. Julian swallowed the bile rising in his throat and looked away, terrifyingly aware that he was the only person in a room of 500 people who knew that the city's golden boy was actually a monster. And worse, he had just made eye contact. Julian Vane was a phantom in his own life. He was 24, an archivist for Kincaid Enterprises, and possessed a face that people forgot 5 seconds after looking at it. He liked it that way. Being invisible was safe. It kept the noise down. For as long as he could remember, Julian had suffered from the hum, a constant, low-level static of other people's surface thoughts. Usually, it was mundane, grocery lists, insecurities about weight, snippets of songs. It was annoying, like a radio left on in the next room. He wore noise-canceling headphones almost everywhere to dampen it. But Dante Kincaid wasn't static. He was a symphony of darkness. Julian had only been transferred to the headquarters a week ago. Since then, the headaches had turned into migraines. Dante's mind was so powerful, so dominant, that it broadcasted over everyone else's. Julian tried to retreat toward the exit, the velvet ropes of the VIP section feeling more like the bars of a cage. He just needed to get back to his tiny apartment, take a sleeping pill, and drown out the world. He hears me. Julian stopped. The thought was different this time. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a targeted laser. Cold. Inquisitive. Predatory. Julian refused to turn around. Don't react, he told himself. Asterisk, he's paranoid. He can't possibly know. Asterisk, turn around. Little mouse. The command hit Julian's motor cortex before he could stop himself. He flinched, his shoulder jerking, and he half-turned. Dante Kincaid was no longer looking at the senator. He was looking across the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, his gaze locking onto Julian with the precision of a sniper. The charming smile was gone. In its place was a look of terrifying, icy calculation. Got you. Julian dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the polite hum of the party. Before he could apologize, before he could run, security guards were moving. But they weren't coming to kick him out. They were boxing him in. The interrogation room wasn't a police station. It was Dante's private office on the 80th floor, a space of glass and steel that overlooked the city like a god's observatory. The room was soundproofed. The silence should have been comforting, but to Julian, it was deafening because Dante was sitting on the edge of the mahogany desk, staring at him. Dante didn't speak. He didn't have to. Who sent you? The voice in Julian's head was smooth now, like silk dragged over a blade. Asterisk, corporate espionage? A rival family? You look too fragile to be an assassin. Asterisk, I don't know what you're talking about. Julian stammered aloud, his hands trembling in his lap. I'm an archivist. I work in the basement. I felt sick at the party. Dante stood up. He was taller up close, radiating an aura of oppressive power. He walked slowly toward the chair where Julian sat. Every step coincided with a spike in mental pressure. Liar. The word slammed into Julian's mind, making him wince physically. Stop it, Julian whispered, clutching his temples. Dante paused. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his stoic features. He leaned down, placing a hand on the armrest of Julian's chair, trapping him. The scent of sandalwood and something sharper, like ozone and rain, filled Julian's senses. Stop what? Dante asked, his spoken voice a deep baritone that vibrated in Julian's chest. Stop shouting in my head. Julian snapped, the pain overriding his fear. It hurts. Dante's eyes narrowed. Raise your right hand. Julian's right hand twitched. He fought it, clamping his other hand over it. Dante's expression shifted from suspicion to fascination. Incredible, he murmured. You aren't just reading surface thoughts. You're receiving direct intent. You're a receiver. I'm a nobody, Julian retorted, tears pricking his eyes. I just want to go home. You can't go home, Julian, Dante said softly. He reached out, his fingers brushing against Julian's jaw. The touch was electric. Because if you can hear me, that means you know what I was thinking about Senator Miller. You know I intend to dismantle his career and leave him destitute by Tuesday. Julian shivered. I won't tell anyone. I could kill you right now. The thought was casual, devoid of malice, just a weighing of options. Julian gasped, pressing back into the leather chair. But, Dante continued aloud, that would be a waste. I've never met a receiver before. They are myths. Genetic anomalies. And judging by the fact that your nose is bleeding, you haven't been trained to shield. Julian wiped his nose. His hand came away red. I need an assistant, Dante decided, straightening his tie. I have a job. In the archives. Not anymore. Now, you belong to me. Refuse, and I'll bury you in the foundation of my next skyscraper. I accept, Julian said quickly. The next month was a blur of high-stakes negotiations, private jets, and terror. Julian was moved into a suite in Dante's penthouse, ostensibly for protection, but Julian knew it was a gilded cage. He learned quickly that Dante Kincaid was not a man. He was a machine of conquest. The public loved him because he sold them a dream of benevolent capitalism. Internally, Dante was a whirlpool of cynicism and ruthlessness. But there was something else, too. Late at night, when the city was asleep and Dante sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of scotch, the thoughts changed. The violent static receded, replaced by a hollow, aching void. Alone, cold, it never stops. Julian lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the despair of the man who owned the world. It was a profound, crushing loneliness that made Julian's own heart ache in sympathy. He realized that Dante's ruthlessness was a wall, a fortress built to keep the world from hurting him. One rainy Tuesday, after a brutal board meeting where Dante had eviscerated a hostile takeover attempt, they were in the back of the armored limousine. Julian was exhausted. Filtering Dante's intensity for 12 hours a day was draining his life force. You're pale, Dante observed. He wasn't looking at Julian. He was scrolling through a tablet. I'm fine, Julian lied. Asterisk, he's in pain. It's my fault. Asterisk, Julian turned his head sharply. It was the first time he had heard Dante express guilt. Dante sighed and set the tablet down. Come here. Sir. Come here, Julian. Hesitantly, Julian slid across the leather seat. Dante reached out and placed a large, warm hand over Julian's eyes. Close your mind, Dante instructed quietly. Visualize a door. Shut it. I can't. It doesn't work with you. You're too loud. Then let me help. Dante shifted his mental state. It was an act of supreme will. Julian felt the chaotic storm of Dante's thoughts suddenly organize. Instead of a jagged noise, it became a low, rhythmic hum. A lullaby. Sleep. The command wasn't forceful. It was a suggestion, wrapped in velvet. Julian's body went slack. He slumped against Dante's shoulder, the exhaustion finally winning. For the first time in his life, the noise stopped. He fell asleep breathing in the scent of rain and power, unaware that Dante Kincaid was looking down at him with an expression that terrified his security detail, an expression of utter obsession. The dynamic shifted after that night. It was no longer master and servant. It was predator and essential organ. Dante began to use Julian not just as a filter, but as a weapon. During negotiations, Julian would stand behind Dante's chair. Is he lying? Dante would project. Julian would focus on the opposing CEO. Asterisk, yes. He's hiding assets in the Caymans. Asterisk, Dante would smile, that terrifying, shark-like smile, and crush them. But the closeness came with a price. The resonance, as Dante called it, was deepening. Julian found himself feeling Dante's emotions before he heard the thoughts. If Dante was angry, Julian's blood ran hot. If Dante was aroused, Julian's skin flushed. And Dante was often aroused. It came to a head during the winter solstice gala. It was the event of the season. Julian was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than his parents' house, standing by the bar while Dante charmed a foreign dignitary. A young man, the son of a rival tech mogul, approached Julian. He was handsome, blonde, and clearly interested. "You're the mystery assistant," the man said, leaning in close. "Julian, right? You look bored. Want to get out of here? I know a club downtown." Julian smiled politely. "I'm on the clock, I'm afraid." "Come on," the man insisted, his hand brushing Julian's lower back. "Kincaid won't miss you for an hour." Suddenly, the air in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chatter didn't stop, but the hair on the back of Julian's neck stood up. "Get your hand off him." It wasn't a thought. It was a roar. Julian gasped, clutching his chest. Across the room, Dante had stopped mid-sentence. He turned, his eyes burning with a dark, possessive fire. He didn't walk toward them, he stalked. The crowd parted instinctively. Dante reached them in seconds. He didn't look at the blonde man. He looked at Julian. "Are you finished?" Dante asked, his voice deceptively calm. Julian couldn't speak. The mental pressure was crushing. Mine. Mine. The blonde man laughed nervously. "Hey, Kincaid, I was just asking your boy if..." Dante turned his gaze to the man. It was a look of such concentrated malice that the man took a stumbling step back. "Touch him again," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "and you will lose that hand." He grabbed Julian's wrist, not gently, but desperately, and dragged him out of the ballroom. They didn't go to the car. Dante dragged him into a service elevator and slammed the emergency stop button. The metal box groaned to a halt between floors. "Dante, you're hurting me," Julian said, trying to pry his wrist free. Dante released him instantly, as if burned. He paced the small space, running a hand through his perfect hair, disheveling it. "I wanted to kill him." "I know," Julian whispered. "I want to lock you in a tower where no one can ever look at you again." "I know that too." Dante slammed his fist against the steel wall. "Why aren't you running? You know what I am. You hear the darkness. You hear the violence. Why do you stay?" "Because," Julian stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I also hear the quiet." Dante froze. He looked at Julian, his gray eyes wide and vulnerable. "I hear how lonely you are," Julian said, closing the distance. "I hear how tired you are of being the king. And, when you're with me, the noise in my head stops. You're the only quiet I have." Dante stared at him for a long moment. Then, a thought drifted across the space between them, soft and fragile as a moth. "Can I kiss you?" He didn't say it aloud. He didn't take it. For the first time, the man who took whatever he wanted was asking permission. Julian didn't answer with words. He reached out and grabbed Dante's lapels, pulling him down. The kiss was desperate. It was a collision of two souls that had been starving for a lifetime. Dante groaned, wrapping his arms around Julian's waist, lifting him up against the elevator wall. The mental barrier between them dissolved completely. Julian gasped into the kiss as a flood of sensation hit him. He felt Dante's adoration, his terrifying possessiveness, his fear of loss. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. "I love you." The thought was clear, ringing like a bell. Dante pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against Julian's. He seemed shocked by his own internal confession. "I didn't mean to project that," Dante rasped. "I heard it," Julian whispered, tracing the line of Dante's jaw. "And for the record, you're loud, arrogant, and dangerous." Dante smirked, the darkness in his eyes receding to a simmer. But I love you too." The bliss lasted for 3 weeks. Then, the world reminded them that fairy tales don't exist in corporate warfare. Julian was in the archives, retrieving an old file on a merger from the 90s, when the headache hit. It wasn't Dante. It was foreign. Sharp. Malicious. Check the exits. Grab the asset. Julian dropped the file. He tapped his earpiece. Security? There's someone in the building. Static. Dante. Julian projected the thought with everything he had. Dante. The door to the archives burst open. 3 men in tactical gear entered. They weren't common thugs. They were professionals. Julian scrambled back, overturning a heavy metal shelf to create a barrier. Asterisk Dante. Help. Asterisk on the top floor, Dante Kincaid was in the middle of a video conference with the Prime Minister. Suddenly, he went rigid. His eyes rolled back for a fraction of a second. He stood up, overturning his heavy oak chair. Meeting adjourned. Mr. Kincaid. We aren't. Dante didn't listen. He was already running. He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, vaulting over railings, his mind a singular, screaming arrow pointed at the basement. Asterisk I'm coming. Hold on. I'm coming. Asterisk in the archives, Julian was cornered. One of the men had a taser. Don't damage him, the leader said. Orlov wants him intact. He wants to know how Kincaid gets his info. Orlov. The Russian competitor. Julian backed against the cold cement wall. He could feel Dante getting closer. A tidal wave of rage descending through the building. But he wouldn't make it in time. The man with the taser lunged. Julian kicked out, catching him in the knee, but the leader backhanded him. Julian hit the floor, tasting blood. Grab him. And no, the psychic scream didn't come from Julian. It came from the doorway. The steel door was ripped off its hinges, not by physics, but by the sheer force of Dante's entry. He stood there, chest heaving, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. But it was his eyes that made the mercenaries pause. They weren't human. They were voids. Usually, resonators like Julian were the receivers. But in moments of extreme trauma, a bonded pair could switch polarities. Dante wasn't projecting thoughts anymore. He was projecting pure, unfiltered psychic trauma. The mercenaries screamed. They dropped their weapons, clutching their heads, falling to their knees as Dante forced them to relive every nightmare they had ever had, amplified 1,000 times. Dante stepped over their writhing bodies. He knelt beside Julian, his rage instantly evaporating into panic. Julian, he choked out, his hands hovering over Julian's bruised face. Julian, look at me. Julian blinked, his vision swimming. You broke their minds. I don't care. Dante gathered him into his arms, burying his face in Julian's neck. I don't care about them. Are you hurt? I'm okay, Julian whispered. He could feel Dante shaking. The mighty king of industry was trembling like a child. Asterisk, I thought I lost you. I thought the silence was coming back. Asterisk, I'm here, Julian soothed, placing a hand on Dante's chest. I'm not going anywhere. The cleanup was handled efficiently. The mercenaries were found wandering the streets days later, drooling and unable to speak. Orlov's company was dismantled within the week, its assets liquidated, its CEO indicted on evidence that mysteriously appeared on every news server in the world. Julian sat on the balcony of the penthouse, wrapped in a cashmere blanket. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of noise and chaos. But up here it was quiet. The glass door slid open. Dante stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He sat next to Julian, pulling the blanket around them both. Are the headaches better? Dante asked aloud. Much, Julian replied. It helps when you shield me. Dante kissed his temple. I will shield you until the day I die. Julian leaned his head on Dante's shoulder. He listened. The chaotic, violent storm of Dante's mind was gone. In its place was a steady, unbreakable foundation. A fortress. And in the center of that fortress, a single, repeating thought, looping like a prayer. Asterisk my heart. My quiet. My life. Asterisk Julian smiled, closing his eyes. Being a nobody was overrated anyway. Being the only person who owned the monster's heart. That was a role he could get used to. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, not with chains, but with silence. If you enjoyed seeing Dante destroy his enemies to protect what's his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you trade your privacy for a love that could burn the world down for you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.